Hello and welcome to Paducah Human Rights Commission's very own television show. We're proud of it. And our name for the show is Raising the Standard. And that has been one of our main goals for the last few years, is that we wanted to change the perception of the Human Rights Commission, and we wanted to do our part to also improve perceptions, and then to give other people and other organizations the opportunity to do the very same thing right here in our community. And we know that right here at WKCTC Television Department, people can pull up these shows at www.paducah2.org and look at all these shows and appreciate not only this show, but other shows as well. Today, our topic is all about the Housing Authority of Paducah. And Commissioner Gary Reese, a member of our board, and we are going to have a really neat time with our special guest, Cal Ross, who is the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Paducah, and Jackie Floyd, I understand, who wears more than one hat, and so she can tell you all about herself. Welcome to Raising the Standard.
Thank you, Bernice, Gary, for having us here. We're delighted to participate in this, to tell you more about the Housing Authority and some of the things that we're attempting to do as an agency in Paducah serving low and moderate income families.
Thank you. Jackie, tell us a little bit about what you do and some of the interesting things that are very important to you in your role there at the Housing Authority of Paducah.
Well, I've been with the Housing Authority for the last about 10 years now. And I started out in one capacity after a great career in banking. And I have progressed up to this point as director of the property management department. And I have a great staff of property managers, assistant property managers. And then we manage the housing and occupancy for over 1,500 families with the Housing Authority.
1,500 families. Now, that in itself is amazing. I don't think there are probably not 5 people in Paducah who know that bit of information. Now, you know, that is a large number of human beings to virtually be responsible for as it relates to the Housing Authority program. Cal, how long have you been with the Housing Authority? And tell us a little bit about what you did for several years prior to coming to Paducah.
I joined the Housing Authority in May of 2002. I was thinking about retiring from Housing and Urban Development, a federal agency that funds Housing Authority. And at that time, Reverend Henderson interviewed me one day while I was down here, said, "I heard you're retiring," and he said that they're looking for an executive director for the Housing Authority, and it was a pleasure to submit an application at the last minute and be selected as the executive director. My previous job with HUD, which I was responsible for housing authorities across the state of Kentucky, was the deputy director of the Office of Public Housing. And I'd spent 35 years in the federal agency doing that kind of work, and I thought that would give me an opportunity to give back to the community. But I can tell you that I've learned more about public housing than I ever knew at HUD doing this for real. This is where the rubber meets the road, and I'm just delighted to be here and have a chance to affect programs at the Housing Authority for the last 13 years.
Well, both of you have illustrious careers, and both of you have been very successful at everything that you've done. And you are leading success there at the Housing Authority of Paducah, and you're doing it really indirectly and directly for Paducah-McCracken County. And of course, that's a positive reflection on the state of Kentucky. And I want to thank both of you and thank your staff.
Thank you.
I think that Commissioner Reese has your mission statement and a little bit about how your structure is there at the Housing Authority, and so I'll let him take over from here.
One of the things that, having served in law enforcement for many years, I have to be honest, I have noticed a tremendous change in the Housing Authority here in Paducah. Some great, good changes, and to be quite honest, especially since you've been here.
Thank you, Gary.
Both
Appreciate that.
And the landscape, if you don't mind for just a moment, before I get into the mission statement, if you don't mind, kind of describe, there's been there's been several big changes in the landscape as far as the location of the areas, some of the dilapidated buildings and things like that. If you don't mind, just take a moment and kind of explain how the scenery or that landscape has changed over the last, say, 10 or 15 years?
That's a good question. It's not easily answered.
Yeah.
But let me start by, when I got here, I did do an extensive survey of our housing inventory and tried to come up with a plan that we felt would help to improve the property. And so we applied for federal funding. We got federal funding for different things that we wanted to do at the Housing Authority. I actually had a lot more capital grant money that I inherited in 2002 than anticipated. And some of the things that we wanted to do was improve the quality of life of our residents. For example, at Elmwood, which is where our corporate office is, they told me you could not air condition public housing. Now, the people that are moving in public housing today don't realize that prior to 2004, there was no air conditioning. And I tell you, I felt a lot of empathy for the families that lived there because they'd have to sit out at nighttime just to cool off because it'd be 110 degrees in their apartment and 100% humidity. And the day we turned the air conditioning on, changed the landscape at that housing authority. We used to have a lot more incidents with the police department, and air conditioning has helped our families to stay inside and enjoy their apartments and feel more safe and secure. So that was a good thing. At Anderson is one I have to apologize to those families because it was the last development that I invested in. And we finally have turned it around. And under President Barack Obama, we got some ARA funding, about $2.6 million, and we invested every penny in that to turn it into what it looks like today. We tried to make it look more like Lower Town so it fits into the neighborhood, and we tore down 22 apartments, reducing its density, and I think the families there really appreciate its look. It's hard to believe that Anderson and Elmwood were exactly alike. They looked exactly alike. Both were built in 1950. And so you can imagine, they are very large apartments. They were worth salvaging, and that's what we did.
You mentioned ARA. What is that acronym? What does it stand for?
The American Recovery and Revitalization Act.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I know that you have to deal with all of these names and all of these, and I know you have to break them down to acronyms. But just so that someone else doesn't understand it, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I didn't want to forget to ask.
Well, we got two of those fundings. The second one, which was a little over $2 million, helped us to develop H.C. Mathis, our newest development for elders. And it was a combination of the ARA funding that we received under competition. Jackie and I actually did the application together. We didn't realize we were going to get funded, but we tried, and I used some of my contacts in Washington to help us, and they funded us. And so we took the rest of the money out of our capital grant funds, and we were able to build 28 apartments. But as you know, we ran into a lot of difficulty with the ground out there. We had lots of basements and we had to deal with that. And so I lost 4 units having to divert money to prepare the ground for H.C. Mathis. It is a beautiful, beautiful complex, and my families out there really enjoy it. And the only way you can get in there is when somebody vacates it and goes to see the Lord. Now,
H.C. Mathis, is that your regular housing, or is that for a particular group of people?
It is. I think I'll respond to that. Because I did write the application to approve it for elderly housing, and it's strictly for elderly. HUD has a certain definition for elderly and 62 years and older, and we recognized that there was limited inventory in Paducah for elderly, for seniors. And the idea that we came up with was this would be a perfect setting to provide housing for our senior citizens. We had such a shortage in Paducah, and we did not have particularly low-income senior housing. So it was a perfect, I guess.
Yeah, one of the things that Jackie and I had to overcome, because we almost didn't get to build it there, is that site's located in an area that's defined as high concentration of minorities. And HUD has a rule against that. But we were lucky and got to work with Fair Housing in Louisville and said, look, here's the benefits of building it here. It's already seniors programs right across the street of many of our people use those facilities. And after we talked about it for a long time, they granted us approval to exchange that property. It used to belong to the city of Paducah, and then we gave them a piece of property over by Thomas Jefferson's site.
Well, I think that for persons who might not know specifically of that location, that is on the same street with the Paducah-McCracken County Senior Citizen Center.
It is.
Yes.
Yes, it is. And we work with Gwelda Woolridge, who's the director there.
Gary, what direction were you going just a moment before I interrupted?
Well,
I'm
actually,
sorry.
no, you're fine. You're fine. Actually, I want to ask too, and we actually talked about this a little bit before this taping, for the show. Cal and I did, and I can remember many years ago, there were a lot higher crime problems in some of the areas in Paducah and some of the housing areas, and I noticed that especially it seemed like after you got here in the year 2000, 2002, that the crime rate started dropping significantly in these housing areas. Can you speak to that just a little bit and maybe explain how that, or the reason why, in your mind, maybe that has occurred, and maybe talk about your relationship with how you work sometimes with the police and try to focus on, because I know in your mission statement it talks about the fact that it's very important for you all to try to provide individuals with a safe and not only affordable but safe environment in which to live. So if you don't mind, kind of speak to that if you would.
Well, that was another issue back in 2002, was the high crime that we were having in the housing authority. And that was another thing we focused on. So not only the physical condition of the properties, but with the crime. We realized right away that our leases were not being enforced as strictly as they could be, and I hired a bunch of good property managers, and we began to enforce the lease. But I can say the Paducah Police Department stepped up to the plate, and through the Housing and Community Officers Program, HCO for short, we had James Rundles and Harvey Baxter and a couple of other officers, and they're kind of kick-butt kind of guys. And so enforced strict lease enforcement. With the help of the local police department, we were able to mitigate the crimes. In about 2005, 2006, our numbers were astronomically low. It was hard to get data from the police department because there wasn't any data. And so we were very pleased with the cooperative effort. The second or third thing that we did is that we realized that it's kind of hard to see what's going in our developments. And so we applied for funding, and we got a couple of grants to install security cameras. And we put security cameras everywhere. And those have been the lifeblood of the housing authority, because it lets us watch visitors, watch our own residents. Not that we're trying to be Big Brother. And it's helped us to identify problem areas. And with the help of the cameras, we can share that information with the police department. And it's helped, because people do look at the cameras wondering if they work. Well, let me tell you, they're state of the art, and they work perfectly. So I think it's a combination of things, Gary, that's brought down. But I'm proud of Jackie and her staff, because we do focus on problem issues that come up from once in a while. We used to have a lot of people that came in here from out of state, like Chicago. They would move the girlfriend in, and then the drug dealer would fall. But we're more, I guess, leery of those things today, and have mitigated that a lot.
Well, Commissioner Reese, being a retired police officer here in Paducah, and one of the many reasons why I'm so happy that he is on our board. And so I know he would appreciate, and then as a minister, I appreciate the proactive approach to all of those methods that you're using, because you want peace, as much peace and tranquility as you can have there at the Housing Authority of Paducah. And so being proactive and collaborating with the police department and other entities has obviously proven to be very successful, a great return on the investment. I know that there were eyebrows that were raised initially when you wanted to install security cameras, and so you've proven, you and your staff have proven that that was a very wise, a very smart, fiscally smart thing to do. And thank you for that.
Well, we appreciate that, Bernice. It's been a very interesting time for us. And I can tell you the crime rate, we do our very best to mitigate it. You don't always have people that want to play by the rules, but we do our best to mitigate that too. And there's been some issues that have come up, and maybe Jackie can address that, is that the government's changed some of the rules about people that have mental illness. They're no longer providing the mental health that they need.
Yes.
And we have a lot of folks like that have moved into public housing. And that raises some new challenges that we deal with every day.
Now, Jackie, what kind of partnerships or collaborations do you have that will assist you with persons who have some very challenging needs?
Well, there are many social service agencies in Paducah, Cracken County, and even as far as Graves County. And we've found that we have access to these folks. We provide them with a little bit of information about the resident, especially if we assess that the resident has needs. We try to work with the supporting agencies, give them a brief, I guess, update on the person, the individual, whether it's housekeeping needs, whether it's mental health needs. We're not physicians. We are asset managers. So we can only determine that there is an issue, and we provide the social service agency, social worker, or whoever. Four Rivers have been extremely helpful here in Paducah, helping us to provide services to families and residents. So they encourage us to call them if we feel that there's something going on with a family or a resident, and they provide the specific, they do an assessment, and then they provide the specific service or whatever that's necessary. So we do try to look out for our families. We do try to help them, and we find that they really appreciate the proactiveness that our property management staff does to be able to help the family.
Yes.
If we have one complaint, I might like to add to that, and this might lead us in a different direction, is that, as you know, the federal budgets are pretty tight these days. And they've been working on housing authorities for the last couple of years now. We've only received about 80% of our funding. And what happens is that programs like resident services suffers the most, because my primary mission, and the staff kind of reflects what I ask them to do, is to maintain our apartments. So we put a lot of money in keeping our apartments up so they have a nice, affordable home to live in. But it's very difficult to keep these other programs going without the money coming in. To us, you're talking $500,000 a year just on the operating subsidy alone. And they've reduced our capital grant from $2.2 million now to about $1 million a year. Just not enough money to keep everything going. So we put a lot of bandages on our properties.
Well, that's another good reason why it's so important to have all of you in place with your experience and your background, because you know how to take a tough situation and work it to the best of your ability on behalf of the people that you represent. So, and we thank you for that. We know that there's some head scratching going on every now and then.
Definitely.
Well, let's go into something that I think, for all the people who are history buffs, maybe we should find out the best that you can recall. How long has a housing authority been in operation in Paducah?
That's easy, as it shows on my shirt. 1938 is when the housing authority was formed, and they opened their first developments, which are now gone, in 1941, 1942. And so the vast majority of our property is probably between 60 and 75 years old. And so H.E. Mathis is the exception. We just built that one, but we've rehabbed a lot of our other properties. There's some other programs that are coming down called Rental Assistance Development, called RAD for short. But it provides a great deal of money for rehabilitation or knocking down old structures. But the board has chose not to go that path, because it does mean some big changes in public housing that we're not willing to make right now.
Go ahead,
Well,
Commissioner.
speaking of that, I know there's some big multi-unit facilities that have been torn down, like the former Thomas Jefferson Apartments in Lincoln Court. Was that part of RAD, or was that something?
No, that predated RAD. That was just a demolition program that allowed housing authority to knock down apartments that didn't meet the quality standards that we have today. And they had some issues with the infrastructure in those units. And you can tell back in 1941, the construction criteria was much different for Thomas Jefferson and Lincoln. And so it was to the advantage of the housing authority to tear those down because there wasn't sufficient money to rehab them.
And so you have how many sites now?
About 10 in altogether.
Yes, awesome. Let's talk about the application process and the criteria that you have established for persons to become residents of Housing Authority of Paducah.
Well, you would think it would be an arduous process, but it's pretty simple, straightforward. We, as you know, are governed, our processes and procedures, our policies are governed by the federal government, by HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development. So they pretty much dictate how we are to, provide services and housing to residents and citizens of our community. The application process is straightforward. We provide anyone an opportunity to apply for housing. We don't make exceptions or whatever. Now, the federal government does have guidelines.
Yes.
in that they have to be a certain income level. The latest push has been to help families that have been homeless, veterans, homeless veterans. So it's been a big push for that. So we're seeing more and more of that because basically housing, public housing, is housing people say as a last resort. So we don't put up a lot of restrictions. We don't disqualify them just automatically, but we do encourage most citizens to apply. There is an income limit, so they have to fall within the federal income limit guidelines. And once an applicant or once a person applies or a family applies, then of course they have an opportunity for their name to go to a wait list, because in public housing and most housing these days, the wait list has grown.
Yes.
And it's large, pretty large. But we have a process to allow people to float to the top. And so we have a process there, which is, again, mandated by the federal government.
Yes.
So we do work with our families. We allow any resident to apply. And once we do perform background checks, because we talked about the crime statistics and that kind of thing. So we try to reduce that because we've got really great families who work. Many of them work. They have children. They have children in daycare. Our elderly families. So we do want to provide a decent, safe place for them. So we do have to monitor during the application process any criminal history or background. So that's a big screening process or procedure for us in the application process.
And we do have a website that we've been operating for quite a while, Paducah Housing. It's www.paducahhousing.com, and everything that she's talked about is there. The application, our policies, and this helps a lot of people to figure out how they can get administered into public housing.
Cal, is there a base rent? Is there a minimum rent? And I'm not sure if asking if there's a maximum rent is relevant. But is there a base? Okay.
We have both a minimum and a maximum. One of the things that we just went through with the Housing Authority was a change in how you calculate flat rents. That's people whose income is pretty good. And when you take 30% of that, it's either equal to the rate that we're allowed to charge or more, okay? But because of the flat rent, it restricts it at a lower level. And we just went through a really hard time with our residents implementing the new rents because many of their rent actually jumped. It wasn't us. We were just implementing federal regulations. We have a minimum of $50 to a maximum of $500 and some odd, I think, for a 4-bedroom.
And of course, that's
is-
based on income and
Based
so
on
forth.
income.
Absolutely.
30% of your adjusted income. So if your adjusted income is $200 a month, you pay $60. Where are you going to find an apartment for $60?
Absolutely.
That includes maintenance, includes your electrical allowance. That's the best deal going in Paducah. And many of our families are able to stay within that electrical allowance, so they pay basically $60 a month. Sweet deal. That
Yes.
provides all your maintenance. We cut the grass. We put in new refrigerators, put in new stoves for people, and they really seem to enjoy that.
And the improved environment, all the renovations and things, they don't feel isolated in terms of how it looks where they live. Now they feel like they're a part of the community, and that is so important to improve the well-being and the well-being in the mind of people, to know that they're not isolated physically and otherwise from the community. They just kind of blend in, so to speak, and they feel more proud of that, and probably more apt to take care of things.
Well, one of the things I've challenged Jackie and her staff to do is to be more responsive to the public. And I think that we actually do an excellent job. Sometimes we're accused of not returning phone calls, but we do return emails, we do return phone calls. We take care of the emergency work order system, and we do that in less than 24 hours. Our usually average a work order is probably somewhere around less than 6 days. Where can you find a plumber in Paducah that can come in less than 6 days?
Right.
We're usually there
we
pretty
love all the
quickly.
plumbers.
Yeah, we do love the plumbers.
We're just being realistic, aren't we, Cal?
We're being very realistic.
Yes. We have a couple of minutes left, and I know you have so much that you could share because there's so much involved in HAP, Housing Authority of Paducah. But Gary, how would you like to close?
Well, I did have a question. I want to go back to the funding, and I know that you said that, if I understood you correctly, that your federal funding has dropped about 20%.
At 20%.
About 20%. So that affects some of the programs that you would like. And I know that in your mission statement, one of the things you strive is to maintain and actually help people become more self-sufficient. Are there any programs or are there any other agencies besides maybe the ones we mentioned that you collaborate with to try to provide people with the assistance, say economically or budget-wise, learn how to budget better, those kinds of things? Are there any programs in that way that you would try to help folks with?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because I am so proud of the fact that we've been able to hire a number of our residents. There's a program called the Section 3 program. And what it basically says, you receive federal dollars, you have to do something to promote education and training for low and moderate income people. And we just recently hired another lady from our development. Her name is Mel. And Mel was our newest homeowner in the last house that we have over in South Paducah. And so we're very proud of our accomplishments of providing jobs for low and moderate income people that have led to permanent jobs with the Housing Authority and others as they move on to bigger and better things.
Well, that's a high note to end our show today. Cal Ross and Sister Jackie, I always say Sister Jackie, we sure appreciate both of you. We know you're busy. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us. And I know, Commissioner Reese, I know that the viewing audience really appreciates this show. And we welcome you and encourage you to go to that website. And we thank you for viewing this show, PHRC Raising the Standard. Thank you so much. Tune in next time.